Right, pattern number 4, very, very common in psychiatry, where we're dealing with problems that are often lifelong. Now, unlike so many brief therapists or modern day therapists, I'm not convinced that all problems can be fixed very quickly, nor am I convinced that all problems can be fixed. We've got to be realistic. There's a huge spectrum of people, huge distribution of different abilities, and some people have quite serious mental health problems that are not going to respond to the kind of stuff I would do on a one-to-one, 1 hour paid sessions every week, blah, blah, blah. Some things are actually a lot more serious than that and a lot more, need more input, medication and housing and environmental stuff. So, this is a pattern you'll see generally more commonly in those environments, in the psychiatric long-term care and support environments rather than therapeutic intervention change type environments. And this is where people test for evidence of the problem and ignore evidence of change. So it's the classic, how's your shoulder doing? Oh, it's all, yeah, it still hurts when I do that. Now, the person may not have noticed it hurts when they do that. What they're doing is, instead of going, it's 90% better, they're finding the 10% that's still, a problem, and that's what they report. So I think it's a very British thing. You know the thing. Hi, how are you? I'm not too bad, thank you. Very different. You won't find many Americans doing that. They're great and all the rest of it. How are you? Yeah, can't complain. So it's an absence of negativity rather than the presence of positivity that some people, their default mechanism to assess. And this happens a lot around how the same pattern then comes to symptoms. People look for evidence of the problem still being there. So what we can start to see are things like a person makes 99% improvement in their life. It might be over a set of symptoms, they might have infinitely improved in, say, depression scores or whatever else, everything is improving, but they fail to notice. The only thing they notice is the 1% that's still wrong. If you look at the news, thousands and thousands, countless events happen planet-wide every single day, yet only certain agendas get reported to us, and it's almost like everything else is ignored, and then the agenda changes. And it's almost like when the agenda changes, the news behaves as though that event no longer happens anymore. It's no longer significant. So every now and again, there'll be a story like dangerous dogs. Dogs are biting people in the country, we must do something. Well, people are getting bitten every day. The stats don't change all that much. They're fairly constant. It's just whether it's an agenda. Now what we have is confirmation bias, because now once we're aware of a particular thing, we start to see it and we ignore the other stuff. Pain and suffering works in a very similar way. The whole function of pain, the whole purpose for the existence of pain is to get your attention. It's very hard to ignore a toothache. A toothache says you've got to do something about your tooth. Backache can be horrible. I once had an accident where I hurt my lower back. For 6 weeks, it was excruciating. And after about 2 weeks, I became so miserable because I started fantasizing in my head, is this how it's going to be forever? Is my life over? Because time slows down when you're in pain. And oh my God, it was awful. Of course, I recovered and it was fine. Pain gets our attention. And when we live in a miserable, inside our heads we're miserable or we're suffering, we often will look for that externally too. There's nothing worse than feeling unhappy in a happy place. It doesn't necessarily make you feel happy, although it will happen for some people. Being unhappy and then being taken to a happy place just amplifies your unhappiness, or it makes you hate all the happy people. One of the two. This is the stuff that happens. Pain gets our attention. Things that are no longer a problem, they don't get our attention, even if they are a problem for somebody else, like in the media reporting. So because of this, we tend to see this thing, which is we ignore the rate of change, we ignore the things that have improved and changed, and we simply focus on the problem. Now, in mental health environments, in medical-orientated environments, they have to measure things. Because of the way the system is organized, and I don't know who came up with this idea, to be honest, but because of the way it's organized, we measure the problem. We don't tend to measure health so well or wellness, because that's not why the person is receiving the treatment or the care that's being delivered. They're there because there is the presence of a problem that we're intervening in. We're very much working with the illness model rather than working with a wellness model. So what can start to happen, and here's a true story for you. I met a guy in a mental health unit. He had been there for 8 years. Now, this was a care in the community program. He had been many years in orthodox psychiatry in closed conditions previously. He was now in a community care home, and his diagnosis was depression. So it's not like if I get depressed, I'm just a bit unhappy and miserable, it soon passes. No, we're talking serious, life-threatening type stuff. So I don't doubt that there was at some point in his history, he had been suicidal. It's a life-threatening situation. But that was years ago. Now, he's in a residential setting. And the problem is, every shift change, the staff have to write a report of the shift, and they have to do a quick summary of each patient. After 8 years in a residential setting, what do you write about somebody? Had cornflakes for breakfast. Got up at 8 o'clock this morning. Has not opened his bowels. How would they know? This is the kind of level, but they have to write a report, so any old rubbish tends to get written. Well, for 8 years, 3 times a day, because there were 3 shifts, 7 days a week, 365 and a quarter days a year, he was asked the question, have you had any suicidal thoughts? Now, this is amazing to me because I don't know about you, but if I was asked that question repeatedly, every day, 3 times a day, and you know how it happens, you know this thing. I've experienced this when I got married. One of the biggest problems about getting married is other people. Because for about 1.5 to 2 years after you get married, people go, how's married life? And no matter who asks it or how they ask it, it is impossible to answer that question without sounding defensive. Somebody even once said to me, so have you had your first argument yet? Fuck you. I don't know what kind of, but this is how people think. I get it. I totally get it. Now, if I feel defensive just by people asking me, so how's married life? I wonder how I would feel if psychiatric professionals 3 times a day were asking me, have I had any suicidal thoughts? No, not state, no, I haven't. No, I haven't. Are you sure? And I heard people actually do that. Are you sure? Then in their notes, they were writing, denies suicidal thoughts, as though it's happening, but they're denying it. This is the kind of nonsense that happens. When I worked in surgical units as a general nurse, I would hear staff asking patients, how much pain do you have? How much pain have you got this morning, John? That kind of stuff. Which of course, he might have been there reading the paper and not noticed the pain, and now he's asked, how much pain do you have? Because he's being asked to measure it, because we have pain scores we have to fill in, and we have to measure the effectiveness of the painkillers. So the whole paradigm is built around the measurement of the problem, rather than measurement of the absence of the problem, which I get, because otherwise how would we organise medical treatment? Now, the effect of this, of course, is some people, especially if they've been in a long-stay treatment environment, what they start to do is they start to reason and think this way, especially if they're British, because it's in our culture anyway. So their way of interacting around anything to do with their health and their own inner experience is to be measuring constantly what the problem is, as opposed to measuring what the problem isn't. And so their focus now comes down very much onto the symptoms. So our work with this pattern of chronicity is basically to become aware, predominantly as practitioners, of how we interact with that. What do we do? Now, obviously, on the IEMT practitioner course, this is the kind of stuff that gets taught. So, maybe man, 1% of the problem represents 100% of the problem. 99% improvement gets ignored. Right, we're going to go on to pattern number 5.